Welcome back, folks, to episode 43 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills and Self-Improvement Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today is going to be a bit of a deep topic, and this has to do with new parents and the feelings that new parents go through that is called new dad syndrome, new mom syndrome. Usually it's not identified so much with moms, but it still occurs with them because whenever one becomes a new parent, new baby's first time, and it happens with the others as well after the fact to a lesser degree, we kind of freak out and we start feeling some really large, intense, powerful feelings that maybe we haven't had before, and it can be very overwhelming. So the title of today's topic is going to be the dissolving of the self, the dissolution of self, or the loss of self in new parents, and the struggles to fulfill a new role. And this really comes down to two things. One is the conception of what we have of ourself, that's our ego and our self-image, that which we've been talking about in other podcast episodes having to do with immediate survival self-qualities and how we interact with folks in the social realm, but also it has to do with how we interact with ourselves when we're with ourselves and how we see ourselves and think about ourselves. And those are concepts and ideas. Those are subjective, which means they're thoughts that we tend to hang a lot of weight on because that's how we identify, but it doesn't necessarily make it real. It just means that is for all of you younger generation folks that play video games that get all excited whenever you buy a new skin for the games that you're playing because they're neat and they're novel. That is our mental, emotional, self-imagery skin of sorts that we use when we're playing the game that we call life. And sometimes that changes. It's easy to change the role on a video game because you just change the picture's clothing and there you go, you look different, but you're still kind of doing the same thing. But you may have to learn how to do new behaviors or new skills to gain benefits and levels. And it's really a parallel, but not so different. And I'm not saying it's the same thing because it's really not as real life. But whenever it comes to parenting, it becomes very distinct whenever somebody becomes a new parent because there's a lot of new things. During the first 9 months, when you're waiting for baby, during those 3 trimesters, you have these assumptions and ideas, and we have these imaginings and fantasies of what it's going to be like when we get there. For some, it can be very frightening and they run. And there are those that would rather not do that, and to be very blunt, sometimes babies are lost as a result of that, whether through violence or chemistry or whatever else, and I won't get into that. But I will tell you that whenever one does bring a child to term and a baby is born, it's a huge distance from whatever it was that we were conceiving to be the idea of being a parent. Not the same thing. It is overwhelming. And if you have any care or love for your baby, you realize you love more than what you were thinking you were able to do. And you also fear more than what you thought you'd be able to do. And we become very self-judgmental, very introspective in some ways. And a lot of the things that are going on are happening really fast. If we don't have any skill in carrying baby, we need somebody to show us how. Sometimes that happens. Or maybe you helped raise your brothers and sisters and you were shown by mom and dad and brothers and sisters if you helped out with those things. But when it becomes your baby, it's way different. It's not that you don't know the behaviors and the skills, but it takes a huge jump into a depth of reality that is beyond, because now this is part you. This is part your child and part your partner's child. And that can be very frightening, but it becomes very overwhelming when we realize that another human life is dependent on us. Now, I'm going to chop this up into a few distinct bits to make really good sense of it. So these are going to be some self-regulatory skills that have to do with being aware of yourself, but also I'm encouraging you to reach out to those folks that have experience raising babies and not the people that run around doing the fake happy, oh, you're going to do really good, and the baby's fine and you'll be fine. A lot of those folks remember how uncomfortable they were, and they don't know how to speak to the discomfort that goes on inside of the mind and the heart and the body of the new parent, the new dad and the new mom. And I was a new dad at once, and I will share some of my experience as well. And I will also tell you what it is that you can do to help mitigate some of those feelings that can be overwhelming, because it is largely feelings, and it can become behaviors if it's not managed well. So to start off with, the very first thing I'd like to talk about is our self-image, the ego. It feels like it's going away. That idea that we have of ourselves, we spent a whole life building. And that ego self, that idea, that person whom I call in quotes Armando, part of it is the label or the name. Part of it is how I see myself. The other part is how people interact with me as a result of how I hold myself and how they interpret me to be. But that requires attention to myself, in quotes, that we will call right now the ego. And we'll put that in quotes as well, because that is not my term. That's an old Freudian term, but one that actually is rather important to this discussion today. But also, we realize that it is a conception. It's an idea. It's a thought that has been thought, or thunk, depending on how bad English do you want today. But it is a pre-thought thought that we have of ourselves. It's an assumption of ourself, what we call ourself. It's not our true self, but this is our assumption of our social self. And we place a lot of weight on it because that's what we trade with. That's what we use to get along and get things in our life and be able to interact in things that are important to us. And in that sense, it is an important thing at the social level. Now, that is wherever we start seeing some issues, because whoever you thought you were whenever you became parent changes, and it evolves, and it continues through over a lifetime. But during the time that you have a new baby, it becomes exceedingly focused. It becomes a laser focus point where the stress becomes so much that even the ego or a sense of self starts to dissolve or break. Because when you have a baby, what is one of the things that we do the most? And this is a very rhetorical question that you should be asking yourself. What is it that we do when baby arrives? We pay attention to it. We pay attention to the baby. Is she crying? Is he crying? Are they dirty? Do they need a change of diaper? Do they need a bath? Are they running a fever? Are they hungry? When did I feed them last? Why are they crying? We just fed them. They don't seem to be in pain. And maybe they're a little colicky. Maybe they need a burp. Maybe they need to sleep. Maybe they're fussy because they are sleepy and they're fighting to sleep. There's a number of things, and there is nothing that will tell you stress like when a baby starts crying the first time when you're a new parent, when you're trying to figure out the different cries. What is it? Really a cry? Is it just a little fussy noise? Or are they crying because they have pain due to tummy ache? Those things come with time, but it's painfully gained. All the information they gain hurts, because if you love and care for your baby, you feel bad inside because you feel like you can't do anything for them because they can't speak to you. And it's hard to interpret, and you have to go through your list that is not unlike a nurse when you arrive at an ER doing triage, trying to figure out, okay, we changed the baby slept, the baby's on schedule, and they burped, and they pooped, and maybe it's too cold, maybe it's too hot, and we got to see, are they running a rash? Are they teething when they get older? This sort of thing. Have they eaten enough? Did they eat too much? All kinds of questions go through your mind, and they go through your mind a lot faster than what I spoke them, but also they come with this mental, emotional picture load that comes up exceedingly fast. Mind you, our visual memory comes up at 150 to 300 milliseconds. And whenever those pictures come up, they're emotional, and that emotional load makes them really intense, and that can be very overwhelming. And the second part that I'm going to add to this, now that we discussed a little bit of the ego, is attention. Our mind does not pay attention when we tell it to. It is always attentive. It's always taking in information and gathering, categorizing, and labeling and naming it and putting in spaces that make it efficient for future access. So when we consolidate memory, this is kind of what we're doing. We're taking in information, attentive to things even when we're not, in quotes, focusing on them, like people tell us to do in school. Our attention is always on. But whenever we're dealing with baby and baby things, and living in the baby world, new baby world, we realize that everything requires not only attention, but a very specific attention and action, in many cases tied to that attention, plus a sense of urgency. And that is one of the things that is very taxing to somebody's mind, to their body, because attention, just like anything else, requires energy. And where is the energy carried? Blood flow carrying sugar. It's not just the electrochemical response, but the blood flow carrying sugar to do what we call our thinking. And our prefrontal cortex becomes rather overwhelmed, and we might even get things resembling, if we go long enough, whenever it's baby just got here in the first few weeks, whenever baby's acclimating to having sunlight and getting a new schedule, assuming they do, it puts us at a level of stress and anxiety that is very much fight flight. And this is where some of the danger comes in later. And we've got to talk about those dangers, because if no one else will tell you, because they're trying to sugarcoat things because baby's here, I won't. And in duty as a dad and as a granddad now, to all those babies out there, and even to mine own, and even to my own children, I have to be able to speak this and say so with a loving heart and with the kindness extended to all of those that maybe haven't had the advantage of having a parent to teach you, or someone there to help you to learn, or someone to help you out, especially if you're a single parent, male or female, or maybe if you're a grandparent, or maybe an adopted parent. These things can lead to some very severe consequences if they're not managed, one, immediately, and two, if we don't know who to go to, or we feel like we don't have recourse or resource. So the next part, we've talked about ego, we've talked about attention, and this has to do with how we feel, our idea of ourselves dissolving, because we spend so much attention paying attention to this baby, and the first 2 points are tied together here. We feel like we're going away, like we're losing ourselves. At some point, you spend so much time attending to someone else, that's the new baby, that we feel like our ego starts striking out, and it starts getting our attention, and we start wanting to do things, the things that I used to identify with. I've seen people wherever they would start hiking and working out excessively, almost like they're trying to put on the last hurrah before it's all over, because they know it's coming. They just don't know what's coming. It's a big unknown. And they start wanting to go out and party. They start wanting to go out and do things and see things. And it's going to be the last time, the last hurrah. And I've got to do this because I'm no longer going to be just a dad or just a mom or a brother, and not a dad or mom, but rather a brother or sister, or a single male, female, or a married set of folks that no longer are going to be non-parent, but soon will be a parent. And we start seeing things that are what we call egosyntonic, those things that validate the fact that I exist. I, in quotes, the idea of myself exists, because that part of me I know will be evolving out, but we forget that the ego is very tied to the visual aspect of our basic self, and it will hijack our brain, just like an addiction. When someone's in addiction and they're in deprivation of whatever substance gets them high, or they maintain with this to feel normal or functional, and they start using excuses to do what would be considerably horrible behaviors otherwise, or maybe even excessive behaviors, because those are the things that are validating that it exists, ego exists, that ego that I named or labeled myself somehow, not knowing that when you go to sleep, it dies. When you wake up, hey, there it is. But if no one tells you this, then we realize that we have this sense of urgency, like, I've got to do this, like something's going to go away. But if you ask anyone that's going through this, they can't point out to you, what it is that feels like it's going away. Feels like there's going to be something impending, doom of sorts on whatever it is that might be going away. They can't point it out. They can't identify it. I'm identifying it for you here. That sense of self, that sense of ego. Now, after baby's born, they realize, well, it didn't die. I'm still me. But something changed. And that is that the attention no longer is focused largely inward, or largely on things outside that I can validate myself with or make myself feel good with. And we take kind of a second place, a space behind the priority that is the life of this new little neonate, this newborn, this infant, this individual. And that can be very taxing mind-wise, emotionally and physically, if they don't sleep well. And not that babies are good because you have one that sleeps at night. They're all beautiful and wonderful little children. Well, not quite children yet, but you understand what I'm saying. But some of them are kind of dysregulated in their schedules. I had one of those that did not sleep for almost 2 weeks. And I was up literally for 11 days, and I started hallucinating at the end of the 11 days due to lack of sleep. I was exhausted, and I kept sitting up in bed, and I was seeing myself making bottles of milk and warming them for my little one. And then finally my dad said, "Mondo, you're exhausted. Go to sleep." And I slept for a solid 11 hours after that, but 11 days, and I was hallucinating because I had such little sleep. Now, was I really wanting to perform and do my best? I absolutely did, with all of my being, all of my heart. But that's the kind of stress reaction that can occur that doesn't make rational sense. And that was a more positive one, but still it was one that I was on autopilot, and I wouldn't have been functional in the sense that I could have been helpful to my baby. But my commitment was such that it was to the end, to the point where I was starting to fall apart. And that's a frightening thing. Now, a couple of other things. I'm going to shift in focus on what goes on the inside, the mental, emotional stuff. And the ego is our idea. Yes, attention is taxing. But sometimes because of that stress of not knowing what to do or even how to relate to babies don't come with instructions or instruction manuals. And all those books that they give you to teach you how to do babysitting and all that stuff, that's all academic. And you all know that an academic is someone that studies books, and someone that has experience. These are your moms and your aunts and your uncles and dads that actually have held babies and cared for babies, the ones that are good parents. Their experiences are the ones you should listen to, because yes, you can study up on the books and get smart, but there's only so much that you can do until you're in there doing it, until you're actually hands-on parenting. And that's a tough thing. So what I'm going to point out now is some of the darker stuff that occurs on the inside. And you would think a baby is all unicorns and rainbows and butterflies, and they are. They're beautiful when you get to enjoy them, but at the same time, they can induce a lot of stress. But they're not inducing stress in you. It's just our stress reactions a lot of times have to do with our self-adjudications, our harsh judgments of ourselves, where we feel inadequate, where we feel like we're failures, where we fear hurting baby, or maybe when we stress out and we get tense and then baby gets tense and they start crying, not knowing that we are triggering that tension in the baby's response. And we have to learn how to calm down and relax. And I don't like telling people to do that, but one way I like to tell them is whenever I'm showing them how. And that's many times just being able to breathe at ease, being structurally comfy, and sometimes being seated. And if you feel tense or scared or anxious or having thoughts, wherever you start having thoughts of not necessarily intentionally hurting baby, but like you're going to drop the baby or something like that, don't do it. Don't pick up baby. It's okay. Baby cries a little bit. Don't leave them crying forever, of course, but let them know you're there. Sometimes you need to call them and maybe not carrying them in your hands if you're not sure, because you're feeling some overwhelming feelings and thoughts. And that's okay. You're not going to hurt baby by doing that. Now, I'm going to step a little further into the side of the dark. This is not to hurt anyone's feelings, but rather to educate you. Working in mental hospitals and working in mental health clinics, I have dealt with many women that have had struggles, and it's not the postpartum depression thing. That is the larger overarching thing that goes on. And postpartum depression does not just occur with moms. It happens with dads too. And we have to identify this. We don't want to leave the men behind. Just because they supposedly are looked at like they're the stronger sex does not necessarily mean that they go unscarred or unscathed. This is not true. I'm validating you here, folks. Men and women both. This is hard. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just takes time, and it's not to be done alone. It is a hard thing. So this is where we're going to diverge a little bit, and I'll give you a little storytelling time that will be educational. Now, we've talked about how our mind and our visual mind represents things kind of like a mental move or a mental picture. And often whenever we've talked about suicide in particular, or homicide in particular, or self-injury, we were seeing things that if we were to take a picture and draw it on a board, how would you change that if part of that picture involved you, a little picture of yourself in that, and it might be a stressful picture? Well, we'd erase ourselves. We have erasers, dry erase markers, or those that used to use chalkboards and stuff. Well, I'm old school in that sense because I've used those. But it's a clean transition into a new picture whenever we're not where the stress is, and sometimes erasing that. Oftentimes, this stuff comes up really fast, and our mental representations are meant to get our attention. So if you've ever seen a Chucky or a killer clown or anything like that, and that pops up, it does not mean that that's what you want to do. Often it is getting your attention to tell you something wrong. Beep, beep, there's a problem, and pay attention to this. And often it's about change those things that get the stress. Now, if you don't understand how to interpret the fact that this is an alarm reaction, it is not meant for you to act. It is meant to you to pay attention. And sometimes we see things like where people say, well, I would see pictures of myself, just wanting to, having feelings of just not wanting to be here, wanting to die. And often when people would describe them, it was more like I would just wish I could just disappear. That is a form of erasure from the picture that is stressful, that is called our life. And it may not be happening, but my thoughts of it are subjective, like the ego. When I stop thinking about them, they're no longer there. But at the same time, when they do come back up, they're there. Just like our ego doesn't really go away, but it can be settled. Now, the reason I mention this is that whenever I have talked to new parents, moms and dads, it's really the moms that I've experienced more often, less the dads. And they feel angry, or they have had a painful delivery, C-section, or complicated delivery where maybe their lives were in danger, this sort of stuff. And in childbirth, this is not so uncommon. But one young lady that I was speaking to many years back, she came in and she told me, I have to come see you. And I'm a terrible person, she told me. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm a new mom. It's like, okay, cool, congratulations. How old's baby? Baby's about a month old, month and a half. It's like, okay. So what's the problem, it seems? And she told me, well, I had thoughts of killing my baby. Now, that is a very harsh topic, but she didn't want to kill baby. This was merely a flash, or what we would call an intrusive thought, and she didn't understand. And I said, do you love your baby? And she said, I love my baby. I would die for my baby. And I said, okay, well, I can tell you what's happening. And it's not that you're a bad person. Can I explain? She said, yes, of course, anything. I don't know what to do. Because she started to drink to help deal with the thoughts. And she had it only once. And then it was more so the feelings and the guilt that she was trying to numb. Because she wasn't having this as a continuous thought pattern. So what I did, I asked her to come sit down in the office and we discussed it. And I told her, the fact is, whenever we have thoughts like that, a lot of times it's about not going back again. When we have a negative thought, it's not that I like thinking that or I have plans to do that. But in this case, baby's associated with pain. The picture of who you call your baby is associated with a painful delivery or the pain of a delivery. And the basic self sees in pictures. So if it shows you the picture of killing baby, it's kind of like erase baby, because I don't want to think about that. Our basic self is very basic, and it's always going to see things kind of like a 2 or 3-year-old. And it's going to look at things as absolutes, but also it's not going to be looking at things along the lines of what we would call a timeline. Time doesn't exist for that part of our brain. It can't even tell if it's outside of our body looking out and we see this, or it's something we're experiencing as a memory, something that we look within and experience. And this is really important. And when I told her, your body's associating this baby with a lot of pain, and often we want to get rid of those things that cause us pain. We don't usually go back and keep things that hurt us in our lives, whether it be a rock or we're in a car wreck, this sort of thing. And we associate pain with getting away from or averting and moving away from and staying away from these things. And I told her, said, does this make sense to you? And she said, it makes perfect sense. She said, oh my God, I'm so relieved. So I don't want to. It's like, man, it doesn't sound like you did. It was just a memory. And whenever I discussed that with her, it was very relieving, of course, but she realized that she didn't want to hurt baby. That was just something that popped up as an impulse, because our basic self, our body, does not want to be around things that'll hurt it. And it will remind you in the worst way to not do that again. What was the big problem? It wasn't just having the baby, but it was the pregnancy itself that caused her eventually to have pain. So her sense of self, or her self-image, was like, I'm not doing this again. It's probably best that we stay away from that, because there's a lot of pain involved with that. And fact of the matter is that part of us can't tell time. and it can't tell the difference outside or inside, so therefore it shocked her a bit. And fast forward to about 3 months, and I saw her at the grocery store shopping, and she was with her family. She had a 3-year-old, and she had the little new baby too, and she was so happy, and she just waved at me. But she realized she had no desire to harm baby. She had no intentions to harm baby. It was just that her body was an alarm reaction that was saying, hey, I associate this with pain. Don't do this again. And happily ever after. And she was just a wonderful mom, and had seen her several times after that, and hey, no big deal. But the thing is, whenever she had that, it was a big deal, because she just wanted to be the best mom she could be, and she couldn't believe she had those thoughts, or a thought rather. It was just one. It was the feelings of guilt and shame she was trying to drown out with alcohol after the fact. So she wasn't the only one. There was another that was in a mental hospital because she had that very same thing happen to her. She'd had a baby, and then she basically said that she started having thoughts of harming the baby and harming her husband both. And once again, we had this discussion, this other lady, and I kind of explained to her, who do you associate the blame for that pain with? And she said, well, my husband got me pregnant, and then the baby, whenever I had the delivery, this woman had had a career, and she was married to a long-term military person, and she had lost a lot of autonomy and lots of attention going out towards baby, none towards her. One of the things that we don't realize is that often, with women in particular, and this has been studied, that if women aren't being validated within about a 72-hour period, a woman's ego starts to suffer, and then we start seeing what looks like neurotic behavior starting to set in. And when baby is had on top of the physical part of a painful delivery, you can imagine how she was feeling, almost like she was going away and dissolving, and she was fighting for her life, so to speak. And it wasn't the life of her body. She was healthy, yes, but the life that she considered her ego, that she could not separate from herself, her real self, that was her being, her vehicle, her body. And nobody told her that before, and most people don't hear this. And this is why I'm doing this kind of like a PSA, public service announcement. Let's talk to all the new parents and people that have been parents that have suffered through this and never heard this, and not only get some validation, but some forgiveness and some compassion toward yourself, because having a new baby is a difficult thing. I'm not advocating against, I am advocating for taking care of your baby, of course, but I'm not advocating against having children because it's hard. It's a very rewarding experience, of course. But I will also tell you that you become a more complete human being whenever you become a parent as well. And some people will take issue with that, and that's okay. But until you get there, you don't know. But once you do get there, you do realize there is a maturation that occurs within the individual that is not only valuable, but is very healthy. Now, we've discussed some very heavy things today, and I want to tell you thank you for spending time with me today and let me talk to you, because this is not an easy thing, not by any stretch of the imagination. On top of that, we're running a little long. We may hit more on this topic as we go forward, but do share this with parents, new parents, even people that have been parents before, maybe even someone that's wanted to be a parent. And this only touches on some of it, but I'm really touching on the things that are really difficult to deal with, because often the males are left aside and don't get the support they need. And often they buy into this thing that, I'm somehow less of a man if I succumb to those feelings. And women, they go through the same thing in a different way, but the emotional overwhelm is there. And often we just have people validating them because they're doing the outside behaviors just fine when they're shattering and falling apart inside. And we need to support that inside so they can grow into those new clothes and shoes that are a little too big when you get into them once you're a new parent, but you grow into them with the right support. And of course, if you're not sure, go seek resources. If you don't feel you can do it, don't be a parent and not be a good parent to your babies, because they need you, and it's a long-term thing. But it's one of the most rewarding things you can do for yourself. And it's not an accomplishment to have a baby. It is a journey in the truest sense. And I certainly extend my love and kindness to you, and I'm hoping that this will reach a lot of ears out there, and that we can make a difference in the lives of many parents, new parents, and many parents that have been parents before, and also in the lives of those little babies, all those little squeezy cheek babies that are so cute. Hey, Tell them hello for me. And I want to tell you thank you once again for spending time with me this evening. And I hope you share this podcast today and keep sharing it because it's going to be something that's useful moving forward into the future. And like, follow, and share. And also, if you know somebody could benefit, please share it with them. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can send me an email at runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com. Take care, folks. Walk well.